Hillary Clinton makes history as the first female U.S. presidential nominee from a major party. In a speech before the Democratic National Convention, she reminded Americans of her long career in public service and gave a glimpse into her policy priorities if she becomes president. Here to recap the speech, CCTV Sean Callebs joins us from Philadelphia. And Sean, Hillary Clinton formally accepted the Democratic nomination for president. What did we hear in that speech? What were the foreign policy highlights?
Anand, you're exactly right. The presidential nominee for the Democratic Party came out and said that the world is watching the United States right now, and indeed that the stakes are very high, and actually said that it is now a moment of reckoning, really trying to draw a stark contrast between herself and the GOP nominee, billionaire Donald Trump. She pointed to her 40 years plus in public service and talked about the fact that Donald Trump has no public experience. So what the international community is getting is a known commodity versus one that they've been reduced to trying to understand through interviews and sound bites that appear periodically. International media also making a certain degree of attention the fact that this was a very significant, very historic moment, the first time that a woman had been nominated president of the United States to head up a ticket. She talked at length about what she would do about ISIL, have more airstrikes and find a better way to support the ground troops in that area, and also find a way to tap into the social media that ISIL has been able to use so well to recruit and also to launch lone wolf attacks. But in large part, Anna, she really talked about domestic policy. She said her primary job was to create jobs for people in the United States and to improve their wages.
And Sean, what was the other international reaction to the speech?
I think it was very interesting to watch that we were in an area where there were a great deal of international journalists, and we had a chance to walk around and talk to them to get their opinion on what happened. And to a person, everybody understood the historic significance, that this was probably the most important political speech that Hillary Clinton has ever given, or perhaps will ever give. A lot of people were very confused with the U.S. election process. Not necessarily confused, but just perplexed. But how could someone who speaks in such harsh terms as Donald Trump rise to become the GOP nominee? And also understand that Hillary Clinton has a great deal of baggage herself. There's big trust issues, FBI investigation into her private server when she was Secretary of State. So those issues are certainly gaining a lot of attention, and certainly Donald Trump wanting to build the wall along the border with Mexico, crack down on immigration, whereas Hillary Clinton came out and said the exact opposite, that this is a nation of immigrants, and she believes that there's a time to tap into the millions of people who are in the United States who are already earning wages and paying taxes. And so there was a stark contrast, and that is really what's being embraced by the international media.
Thanks, Sean. That's CCTV Sean Callebs reporting from Philadelphia. Joining us now from Beijing, Tian Wei is an award-winning journalist and host of World Insight on CCTV. With me in the studio, Joanne Bamberger is author of Love Her Not, The Hillary Paradox. From London, Abdel Bari Atwan is editor-in-chief of al-Youm newspaper, and from Moscow, Stanislav Byshok is a policy analyst for the CIS-EMO think tank and author of the forthcoming book Eurosceptics. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Joanne, let me start with you right here in the studio. The convention is over. Hillary Clinton's made history. She's become the first woman to accept a nomination from a major party. But she now faces some formidable hurdles, where she's been facing them for a long time. One is she has to convince voters that she's better than Donald Trump. The other is that she has to disabuse voters of the notion that she's dishonest and untrustworthy. We've seen that. That's a widely held view. And of course, she has to bring on all the supporters from her erstwhile opponent, Bernie Sanders. Has she accomplished that so far?
I think she's well on her way to accomplishing that. I think you saw that in the convention. There were some qualms the first night during the convention with Bernie's supporters, but I think that you saw throughout the course of the convention that people were coming on board, and I think you heard her talk about that in the speech last night. I think in terms of the untrustworthiness issue, it's always shocking to me because I think so much of that comes from a narrative that was set up in the 1990s when her husband was president. And to make a very long story short, we've seen many examples of people trying to, extend that through today. And I think one thing that we could do is hopefully, talk about that a little bit more and make sure that people know that she really is not as untrustworthy as so many people seem to think that she is. And just look at the facts, as opposed to sort of this false Republican narrative that's been built. And so, but she has a long way to go to fight that.
Tian Wei, what did this convention look like from China? I mean, we saw it over 4 days, and these conventions in the United States resemble more of a Broadway show rather than a political event. There's a lot of razzmatazz. It's show business. Was it widely covered in China? What were people interested in?
People are extremely interested in what's going on with the presidential election from the primaries until now. People are looking at it in comparison to the TV drama, House of Cards. A lot of people are saying what is going on right now in the U.S. politics is even more exciting than the plot of the TV drama. Having said that, though, a lot of people are very concerned about the divisive politics that we have seen since the primary with the two parties, both Republican and the Democratic Party, and also whether the candidates are going to continue with their intense China bashing. Many Chinese believe it is not going to be fair.
Abdel Bari Atwan, we didn't hear much about foreign policy in that speech that Hillary Clinton made, and we shouldn't expect to hear much. These things are about domestic policies. But here we have Hillary Clinton, who led the charge against Libya, who is seen as a hawk in foreign policy. Do you think that's going to continue if she becomes president?
Well, actually, yes. Middle East is highly interested in the American presidential election simply because always, the American presidents are involved in the Middle Eastern politics. And I would say that, Middle Eastern people would love actually to be or to have the chance, like American citizen, to determine who is the president of the United States. Anyway, Hillary Clinton will be judged as the lady who actually committed a dreadful mistake in Libya. And when she was encouraging the intervention, American and NATO intervention in Libya, and when she also threatened actually to intervene, sent her military forces to Syria in the same time. So people will judge her as a hawk in the foreign policies. They still will look at her not as a president or the future president, but as Hillary Clinton, the foreign minister, who was actually even encouraging, she was accused of encouraging the Libyan to execute Muammar al-Gaddafi of Libya. And we had President Obama himself saying, intervention in Libya was his biggest mistake, and he regretted that. So people will look at her from that angle. Is she going to be a hawkish when it comes to the Middle East? Is he going to confront the Israeli? If he is going actually to take their sides on the Arab-Israeli conflict and actually not to resume the political process there, the peaceful process there? Is she going actually to intervene military-wise in Syria, in Iraq again? She voted actually for the war in Iraq. Is she going to try to fix what she broke in Libya, military-wise, to try to rectify her mistake there? So people are waiting actually to see what she is going to do as a president. They knew what she did as a foreign minister.
Okay, and we are constantly reminded, of course, that as a senator, she voted for the Iraq war. Let's go to Stanislav in Moscow. Stanislav, the Russians have been drawn into this election campaign in the United States, not by design, somewhat reluctantly, one would say. They've been accused of hacking Democratic National Committee computers, of taking emails out of there and publishing those emails, leaking them at a very opportune moment. What do you make of that? What do Russians make of that?
Well, first of all, I think that if we remember the Watergate scandal, at that time, at the height of the Cold War, none of the Americans believed that those who broke into Watergate were Soviet spies. But nowadays, the things have changed, and we have this Cold War 2.0, and in this case, everything that that is happening in the US is considered by many, especially by the mainstream media and by Democratic candidates and even some Republicans, as something which was plotted in Russia. Russians, I don't think we have any involvement in these publications. However, it's interesting to know that during this Democratic convention, nobody, neither Hillary nor Bernie Sanders, addressed this issue, because at the end of the day, the main question is not who did this leak or who took this information from the computers of Democratic Party, but what was behind it, and actually if there was a fraud, electoral fraud against Bernie Sanders, then maybe someone has to say sorry, but nobody did this, and I think that basically what are Russian interested in these elections is, unlike their American counterparts, Russians are more interested what this or that candidate says about their foreign policy, and they compare Trump and Clinton. Trump is more, if not Russia-friendly, then Russia-neutral, but Hillary Clinton is, as she always were, a hawk. And she said just yesterday that if there is some conflict between Russia and American allies in the Baltic states, then America should intervene. And actually, Russians are, so to speak, not that happy with this candidate.
Okay, Joanne, before we get to the next question, let's listen to part of Hillary Clinton's speech from Thursday night. Let's watch.
Freedom and equality, justice and opportunity. We should be so proud that those words are associated with us. I have to tell you, as your Secretary of State, I went to 112 countries. When people hear those words, they hear America.
Do you believe that to be the case, that when people around the world hear the words freedom, justice, liberty, democracy, etc., they hear America?
I think absolutely. I mean, that's, you know, what our country has been based on since its founding. And I think given what she tried to accomplish as Secretary of State in terms of visiting other leaders, building diplomatic relationships, advocating for women and girls' economic issues around the world, and for many women and girls around the world, economic security means liberty because it gives them more flexibility, more empowerment in their lives. So I do think that. And that's not to say that America is perfect. That's not to say that Hillary Clinton is perfect. But I think given our track record in terms of what we have tried to do, notwithstanding our mistakes, that people do see that. And I would just say one thing on the DNC emails. I mean, in terms of Russian involvement, you know, the FBI has said conclusively that the information came through servers there. Now, who was in charge of them, who made that happen, you know, that's all still to be seen. But I think those are questions to look at.